I am very, 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 very excited for this choreographic forum. Yes, so I am Sinibaldo De Rosa. I am event secretary for the Society for Dance Research, and I've been doing this for a couple of years, but this is my first choreographic forum in this kind of more traditional format, because over the last years we've been working a lot on choreographic forums that were more about documentaries on dance, and so they included film elements. And we did in Bristol and in Italy, one in Bologna, and just this week we had another one in Bristol at the Cube Multiplex, which was about Mabungu, and we screened another shorter film. And it was a very lovely discussion that is going to be available on the YouTube channel of the Society for Dance Research, as also the event that we did in Bristol. So if you want to, if this interests you, you can go and check these recordings there. We don't know yet, but possibly this one could go there as well, but no promise. No commitment. And so I don't know if you have been in a choreographic forum before, but the idea is to gather to discuss choreographic films that we all watched. I don't know if all of you watched it already, or if you didn't, it's still gonna be very interesting to you.
Has everybody seen it? Has everybody not seen it yet?
Last year, and
Okay. We have more people coming. We have Arabella Stanger, University of Sussex, and I'm gonna ask you to introduce you. Actually, I don't have the other. I can tell you that she wrote a very good book.
That's nice.
Yeah. Which I read and reviewed on Dance Choreographies. So I was very happy when Seke suggested that we invite Arabella, and today finally I did. And we have Clare Finburgh Delijani.
very good, well done.
From Goldsby.
Yeah.
And she's working on post-colonial theater, and especially in France.
Yeah.
She will tell us something more about that. So they will give a response to the film, but we are very lucky that we have Seke, that all of you will know, Chimutengwende, I think I learned by now, the choreographer of the piece. And also we have Charlie Ashwell, who is the dramaturg of the piece. And also Isaac joined us, who is a dancer. So they are here to witness this discussion and contribute to it. So we are very, very lucky. And before we start, I want to ask you if you wanted to share your kind of quick response, what you remember about the piece when you saw it, or if you want to mention anything that kind of was inspiring to you, or yeah, any kind of response. And maybe you can do this with the person next to you first.
Wow.
There is a lot being shared, which is great. This is why we are doing this, because I was sure that there would be a lot of conversation. And I wonder if anybody would like to share with everybody else what they've been chatting about. I don't want to go on.
Well, that's the reason we thought it would be nice to do this, is that Clare and I are both doing a kind of like ghostly horror themed response, and we didn't want to over determine what people are feeling and thinking about this work. So we thought it would be nice to hear from everybody a bit first, before I think we're each going to speak for about 10-15 minutes. So if people are up for sharing, I think that would be really nice. But if people want to keep it a secret, maybe that's okay too.
No, I guess I haven't seen it yet. I've seen it this evening, and it's really interesting, chatting about the experience as a performer, finding out a little bit what's like really for you, and different conversations and questions that come up. And it's really interesting to have this conversation beforehand, kind of how a work can be expansive. It's like bringing up different questions or fragments of things, or constellations of knowledge, or different sort of actors or directions. But as not because you asked, is that like a closing or fixing experience, or kind of coming here first? But I don't think it has to be stretchy, elastic.
Yeah, different entry points. Indeed, it's also interesting to know how you got to see it. How did you get involved in what? For example, me, when I joined, I also joined when I saw it before seeing it. I also joined the workshop, and of course, it informed the way I understood it.
Yeah, I had that, thinking about tracing, I had that experience because I had done this quite big term and thought, oh, second classes, so go to work. And then it really informed how I experienced the piece, so trace of the past, and then, making traces through it. But in some ways, those words seem to come back in, although I didn't hear the words again, but in the soundscape at the end, that space, and nothing there, words want to be haunted that space, and that's it. But the dancers have left, some of the words can't react.
Anybody else want to share thoughts?
I can say things I was thinking about last night while watching. And like even though I've spent a lot of time with the work, I'm always seeing new things. And last night it was raining very heavily outside, and there's a lot of silence in the work. And in one of the long silences, the sound of the rain pouring down a drain pipe almost inside the theatre, it felt like it was like roaring. It was very, very loud. It was like the soundtrack to the work that came in uninvited, which I really enjoyed. I love that feeling of like when something is live, there are forces, as of unknown forces that will make themselves present without you can do anything about it. But it felt nice to like sit with that and welcome that.
That was quite a nice interruption actually. It came at a perfect time, for me anyway, at the edge of the universe, so there's like a moment of respite. And then suddenly I just noticed, like, is there water behind me? And when I looked at that kind of gesture, it's also part of the choreography of the piece. It's just like, oh, no, but I'm really into this. Nice.
There was a little laugh of acknowledgement that as well. People thinking.
I also heard a lot of water. Yesterday I joined the touch tour, the accessibility, and during that as well we had becomes. yesterday was as the woman who was leading the tour mentioned, yesterday was Friday 13th. Yeah. So maybe we can move on to speak about the juicy ghosts.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about ghosts and haunting, but mostly from the perspective, maybe a historical perspective, of the ghosts of our colonial past that haunt us today. So this is maybe one reading or one way into the work, but the work that you have created, it's not a history book or a work of sociology or cultural theory, it's a work of art. And work of art, of course, can be read in many, many different ways. So these are just a few ideas, but they're in no way intended to cancel any other ideas that you might have had, because it's not a work that's on the nose that says this is what we're telling you at all. It's a work that opens out as opposed to locking down meaning. It opens out in many, many different ways, as a work of art does. I've picked out a few phrases and motifs, and I'm just going to kind of riff off them a little bit. So one of them that is repeatedly chanted, that you'll probably remember. I hope not too many spoilers. It's going to be quite a lot. Yeah. Okay, so one of them that is repeatedly chanted is profit, land acquisition, the accumulation of private property, bodies as private property. This is repeated again and again. Now, bodies as private property obviously is going to evoke the trade in captured, deported and enslaved Africans that took place in the from around the 16th century onwards. We've also got the accumulation of private property that is talked about, profit, land acquisition, which can mean different things, but could also mean colonial invasion, occupation, land grabs, the plantocracy in the Caribbean, the British Empire or European empires across the globe. And so where do ghosts and haunting come into that? Well, we're in a part of London where we just need to look out and all of the buildings around us were except the ones that bombed in the Second World War, but basically all of them were built in the 18th and 19th centuries at a time where Britain accumulated enormous wealth, vast wealth. And up until the beginning of the 19th century, that enormous wealth mostly came from the Caribbean and depended on people being enslaved and working on plantations. And with the abolition of slavery into the 19th century, the British Empire expanded enormously across the globe into India, all over Asia and Africa, and the massive accumulation of wealth in a place like central London depended enormously on that expansion of empire. So we are haunted everywhere we look right now. And there's a scene that you might remember, or that you will see this evening, where we've got a sort of maybe haunted house. And this haunted house, again, it's ambiguous. Nothing is obvious. Okay? But we're told about a suit of armour on the wall. I seem to remember in the rehearsals that there were elephant tusks mentioned. But I think that's been taken out. And is it back in?
Yeah, it comes in later.
Oh, it's in later. Okay. So we can maybe think that this is a sort of stately home, an English stately home. Not necessarily, but it could potentially be. That's what was evoked to me. And I do encourage you, not right now, but I do encourage you to look up an amazing project called Colonial Countryside, which is run by the National Trust in conjunction with a fantastic scholar at the University of Leicester called Marine Fowler, and also by many school children. It's a school-led project where school children go into these stately homes, which are all over Britain and were built exactly at this period of the 18th and 19th century with this huge accumulation of wealth. And a lot of these homes were built with proceeds from the Caribbean. And the National Trust is looking to look at the relationship between colonialism, how enslavement is haunting these houses today. So there are several things that they are doing, which I think are really positive. Quite a lot of these homes have paintings up where you might have, the family, the nobility who owns that stately home, and you might have a black servant in that home, and they are getting the children to write about those. This project, Colonial Countryside, is getting the children to write about those paintings and about the legacy of colonialism, and also the project is trying to find who those people were and to give them names. Who were those servants or enslaved people? Yeah, because you'll have the family who's all named, but who were those people? So that, for me, this kind of idea of a haunted house. Direct relationship to colonialism, but what I'm saying is that all of the houses around here in some respect are haunted in that way. There are a couple of people I wanted to mention, and there's another quotation. She lays her forehead on the ground. We have someone who's laying face down, performer laying face down. She lays her forehead on the ground. Past is a shadow, unfinished business. And here again, we've got this idea of this past, that is not in the past. The past has not passed. And there's a wonderful Black American scholar called Saidiya Hartman who talks precisely about that the past is not past, that the colonial past lives with us every day. Mm-hmm. And it lives with us in the cotton that we wear. It lives with us in our jeans that are dyed with indigo, that came from colonies, cotton that was grown on plantations. It lives with us in the tea that we drink. It really, if we're talking about these ghosts, they are absolutely running through every aspect of our everyday lives. There's a quotation I'll mention Saidiya Hartman in a moment. Selena Thompson, you might know, created a wonderful show called Salt, which is talking about many different aspects of the transatlantic trade in enslaved people, but the fact that we still kind of have the taste of salt in our mouths as a society that inherits from colonialism, but especially if one is a descendant of people who were enslaved. And Selena Thompson says, every penny of wealth, each brick of each intimidating building, the pavement slabs of quiet city streets, and the soil beneath rolling green hillsides are built on suffering, massacre, and death. So I think that again is showing the kinds of the past, the Saidiya Hartman says, that's crashing into our present all the time that we can't get away from. So these are the kinds of ideas of the ghosts of the colonial past that are inhabiting us everywhere. But this is what is loosely kind of defined, can be defined as Afro-pessimism of an idea of a past that is, a present that is haunted by, as Selena Thompson says, suffering and massacre and death. And I think this is a legitimate position, but I think the show also shows other positions that are much more affirmative, and I'm going to get onto them in a moment. But it is just worth coming back to Saidiya Hartman, who talks about the time of slavery slavery and the fact that the time of slavery is not over. We're living in the time of slavery now. And she specifically said it because she said that Black people, for example, racialized people are far more likely to be disadvantaged when it comes to education, health, housing, the situation with policing and incarceration. And there's a really powerful scene that takes place with these dogs barking in the show. And sorry, I'm throwing references at you, but these are really fantastic people who are working to promote the sample. Bénédicte Boisseron, who has written a book called Afro Dog. It's written in English. She's a French scholar who lives in America, in the USA, and she talks about how this is something that was evoked to me. Dogs were used for chasing, tracking down fugitives who ran away from plantations. But she talks about how dogs are also used by the police today. You know, and not so long ago, this was really famous print by Andy Warhol, the Birmingham race riots. You'll probably recognise it. It's an Alsatian that's like looming up and snapping at a Black civil rights protester. So this is what Sadie Hartman's talking about, that the time of slavery is not in the past, it's in the present. So I don't want to finish though on this kind of pessimism of the past that's always haunting us, because ghosts are also kind of tricksters, and they can be playful and they can pop up unexpectedly. And there are these moments where the performers are kind of walking backwards and gasping because ghosts are popping out from here and there. And there's a wonderful performance poet whose name Jay Bernard. Jay Bernard is a wonderful performance poet who says a fantastic thing. I am haunted by this history, but I also haunt it back. Yes. And I think this is what the show shows really brilliantly, that we've got these performers showing that there is this haunting history, and we're surrounded by these ghosts, but they're haunting it back with so much energy, with humour. We've got these moments of weeping and keening that turn into laughter. And I noticed in the recording that I saw that set the audience off, and there was a lot of laughter among the audience as well. And so, yeah, that's what I'd just like to kind of end on, the fact that ghosts are impossible to pin down. Ghosts are neither past nor present, or both past and present. Ghosts are neither dead nor alive, or they're both dead and alive. They can be ghoulish, but there are lots of ghosts in cartoons, and they can also, ghosts if they are ancestors, can also soothe us and accompany us and care for us. And we see in the show that there is a lot of care. The show starts with the performers putting their hands on each other's heads and shoulders and arms and legs to care for them. And ghosts can comfort us by reminding us of people, our ancestors, and people who have loved us in the past. And so I'm just going to end with the beginning, because I can't quite remember, but I came to a rehearsal and then I saw show, and I think the beginning might have changed, and what I really loved was that the beginning of the show starts with a kind of birth, a kind of awakening, a kind of beginning, a possibility for a future, because the performers are raising their arms as if they're born, and they're looking at their arms, and there's an awakening, and the show starts with endless possibility. There we are.
that's so interesting. Okay, so I just maybe like a segue from what you were saying to what the response to the work I've had that I want to offer is about haunting. Yeah, I so hear you on so much of that, and there's another kind of haunting I think with this work for me anyway. Have you ever been to a show and then you've just been really haunted by a particular scene? And you can't get it out of your mind or your body. This happened to me, but it begins in darkness. It doesn't always happen when I see a show, but it did with this show. So I first saw it, the first and last time I saw it was 2 nights in a row a year ago, when Seke and his collaborators brought the show to the Attenborough Centre for the Creative Arts that's at the University of Sussex where I work, near Brighton. And it was there for 2 nights, and I saw both nights and loved it. And I went and watched it with some students of mine, and they loved it, and they were also very troubled by it, I remember, which led to us having loads of great conversations. And I also had some conversations with Seke around that time. So I just wanted to acknowledge that probably what I'm going to say holds lots of traces of other people's ideas, not least of all my students and Seke. So I just want to acknowledge those like co-authors. I have no idea which of theirs and which of mine. I know that happens. But yeah, it was a year ago that I saw it. I've just been haunted by this particular scene that won't leave me alone. And I'm curious, where I wanted to start was like, what's that scene? Why is it haunting me? So I'm just going to tell you the scene. It's a bit of a spoiler again, but I hope that's okay. And I wonder if this scene sat with other people as well. So it's towards the end of the work. The dancers are doing something very busy, and then they stop. And they come towards the front of the stage one by one, and it's stillness. And then, for me anyway, like a little bit too late, I feel like I noticed that everybody was twisting their faces. And there's a kind of like face choreography moment. And this is like my memory of the face choreography. And I'm not sure, I may have made some of this up, but I think this is what I remember. Teeth pushing outwards at a diagonal, which I didn't think was possible. It's like I saw some diagonal teeth. Cheeks scrunch up, tongues protrude, jaws drop low, and it was like this thing like the face elongates. Eyeballs pop out, eyes are then hidden by skin, and drools. I didn't know what the verb was, but drooling is a verb and a noun. Drools. I saw somebody drooling that night, and that's my impression of it. That's kind of what haunts me. And through this theme, the performers then start to move into different configurations, and then you have kind of like a series of tableau vivant and like hyper-extended and crumpled statues where bodies are twisted anatomically to kind of meet the twisting faces. And I can't stop seeing that. And I kind of was asking myself why, and I realised this is maybe a very personal thing for me, but it's just an amazing horror scene. That's why I'm into it. And it's also helped me figure something out, which I've been fascinated with for a long time, but this work sort of helped me think about it, which is why it is that horror cinema goes so often to dance, which it does. And I think it begins in Darkness is really interesting because it's like dance that goes to horror rather than horror that goes to dance, and it's really helped me think about that relationship. So I'm going to talk about that for a bit and then come back to the work and see if I arrive anywhere. I think I'm going to arrive somewhere similar to where Clare went, but we shall see. So, yeah, this is almost ready to look at Moira Shearer. This is a series of images of horror movies that are about dance. And when I started Googling all of them, I realised that there's all of these movies have a like signature image of somebody's face. So it also chimed with what had haunted me about this work. Like faces are really important to horror. And I guess there are lots of reasons for that. So we're going to look through these. I'll tell you what they are and not spend too long on them. But I just want to say, I don't think it's a coincidence that you're going to see a lot of white women. And these are not all the horror movies that ever deal with dance, obviously, but it's quite a few of them. And there seems to be a sort of obsession in cinema in general, but in the horror genre to show white women in peril. And of course, this is secures the way the white supremacy can play out through gender. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But I think these are also movies that were very much on my radar as a white woman who was a ballet dancer. And there are a lot of like what I call like ballet's gonna kill you horror movies. And they're so interesting, and they're some of my favourite movies. Not all of these ones are in that category, but I wanted to include those because I think that It Begins in Darkness does some interesting like inheriting, but like smashing of that inheritance, maybe. But yeah, so let's look at them. So there's The Red Shoes, 1948, Howell and Pressburger. This amazing film where Moira Shearer, and a lot of the people in these films are dancers before they're actors, and the directors really make use of the fact that they're dancers. So it's like all about what their bodies can do and what they can do as artists. Not least of all for this movie. So it's the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale. Sorry, there are going to be lots of spoilers here. Moira Shearer, her character Vicky, this is such a micro summary, can't get out of her red point shoes that lead her to her death. So ballet's going to kill you. That's the first one. Next one. This is my favourite movie of all time. Suspiria from 1977, the Italian director Dario Argento. This is another ballet gonna kill you one. It's about a ballet school that's set in the heart of the forest in Freiburg in Germany, and it's run by a coven of witches. And if you can stomach really spectacular, hyper stylized gore and frog soundtrack, you should watch this film. So that's that one, 1977. And then the next one, what did we have? Oh yeah, this is Japanese director Takeshi Miike's Audition from 1999, which is a really brilliant film about this businessman who decides he wants to audition for a new wife. And he holds an audition and he falls in love with this apparently innocent, pure ballet dancer who turns out to be a kind of traumatized, torturing psychopath. And that's another brilliant film. But the fact that she's a ballet dancer is really important, and it is a thread throughout the film. So there's a few more.
Oh, sorry, what was the title?
Oh, Audition. Audition, yeah. There's a few more. Black Swan, Darren Aronofsky, US director. This one's more like the trauma of being a ballet dancer and the psychological horror of actually being breaking down through the pressures of kind of doppelganger competition in the ballet world. So it's about ballet industry. And then a few more. Suspiria in 2018, this was remade. The 70s film was remade by another Italian director. Baldo, you might have to help me.
Luca Orlando.
Thank you. Yeah, so same idea, a dance school, this time it's contemporary dance. So, welcome everyone. As you can see, run by a couple of witches. I'll talk a little bit more about this because I think both Suspirias do really interesting things with whiteness and race. I'll come back to that. And then final one that we'll look at now is the Argentine director Gaspar Noé's Climax from 2018, which I feel like is a kind of dance about the horror, a film about the horror of being a precarious freelance dancer, which I'm sure lots of people here can relate to, which is good to watch. And it opens with a kind of like dance rehearsal gone wrong that turns into this like orgiastic, drug-fueled death trap, which is what dance rehearsals sometimes feel like. All these films, okay. I'm sure there's many others. I don't know about them. If others do, just tell me if I want to watch all of them. So, I guess the question I have for myself is, what do all these movies share, and what do they also share with It Begins in Darkness? And why is dance such a rich subject for this genre? And so there are a few things. Okay, I think dance enables the directors, and maybe dance enables this choreographer and the people involved in making the work, to kind of depict supernatural, malevolent entities, psychic and spiritual histories, hauntings, and trauma, because it enables the directors to show bodies being moved by external forces, being moved by forces that aren't their own, bodies twisted inside out, bodies doing things so extreme that there must be something supernatural at play, people being commanded or possessed by entities or movement that's not their own, but also conversely, people in such command of their own movement, aka dancers, that it's a little bit disturbing. So I think that dance enables all of these movies to like stage a tussle for bodily autonomy. Like, who's controlling my body? Who's going to control your body? Who's going to take ownership of your body and take possession of it? And so I guess it's like thinking about Clare's histories, haunting histories. The possession here can mean like spirit possession, but also chattel slave, the literal ownership of bodies. And I think that's why faces are really important in horror movies. And maybe I was thinking about faces when I was watching It Begins in Darkness as well, because the face is the place where there's like some movement happening between personality, impersonality. Are you there? Or are you not there? Is someone else there? I think that's where the face is a hyper place where that problem can get staged. Maybe that's why I was thinking of this scene. So returning to the dance, It Begins in Darkness. I think that work does all of these things that I was just trying to figure out what all these movies share. I do think it does all those things, but I also think it pushes more forcefully into horror than some of these films are able to do or have done, for a couple of reasons. And this is what I was trying to think through, and this is so provisional, I don't know, and I'm curious what other people think about this. But first of all, I think It Begins in Darkness, and hearing Clare talk about it sort of makes me feel this even more, deals with the hauntings of history specifically. So I just want to think about the problem with Ballet's Gonna Kill You as a genre. Okay, so Ballet's Gonna Kill You. Ballet is obviously, if you think about it in its historical formation, it's less likely to kill the white women who perform it than it is historically and has. Kill the many who were subject to the devastating colonial projects that were tied into the courtly cultures that gave ballet its start, that were ballet's sort of patron patron. But some of ballet's earliest patrons were also the heads of empires. And so if ballet's going to kill you, you've got to. I'm curious about that history of who ballet kills. And I think in the ballet's going to kill you movies, that history is held at arm's length. And that's why I was really, I think, compelled by It Begins in Darkness, because that history is not, it's not a ballet, it's a dance. But that history is not held at arm's length. And I wanted to say about the two Suspiria films, they do deal with histories of white supremacy. Both of them, the 70s one and the 21st century one, do really interesting things with histories of European and specifically German fascism. So that is there, but the ballet's colonial past is held at arm's length. And so I'm interested in this horror dance that does not do that. But also, the second thing, I think that this work pushes more deeply into horror than these other films do, is that it's really funny. The films that I just showed you are deadly serious, and that's okay. Like that's a hallmark of that type of genre. But horror is also really funny. It's a comedy genre, like you were starting to say about ghosts, like the cartoons of ghosts. And I think that It Begins in Darkness is really funny, and I know that's what my students were really interested in. It was so funny. And they were so surprised that they would find it so funny, that they did. And coming back to that scene that haunts me, I remember both nights I watched it, everybody was like pissing themselves laughing. Not the performers, but audience members. There was a lot of laughter in that scene. I don't know if that continues to be the case when this is performed. And I don't have any fully formed thoughts about that at all, but I thought it might be quite interesting for us to talk about as people who've experienced the work. Like, why is it funny? What does that do? I know, Seke, you have thoughts about that, that other people probably do as well. And yeah, but for a horror movie, for a horror dance that's dealing with horror legacies, I think this is the last slide. Two more. Let's just do one more. Get Out, Jordan Peele's film, which I think was part of the research process for It Begins in Darkness, is an example of a contemporary horror movie that knows comedy and does comedy. It's a comedy horror or a comedy. And so I think I sort of arrived at wanting to think about if this work's inheriting and smashing or not legacies of horror cinema, then sort of contemporary black horror, and maybe even like antecedents like Dracula and sort of exploitation horror movies go to comedy, and this work goes to comedy, and this work goes to comedy, and what does that do?
Responses, which very well kind of complement each other.
Yeah.
And I think it's true that we kind of both of you got this specific angle to look at this, but I think it's quite generative to open up all sorts of discussions.
Yeah.
So definitely, I would like now to engage everybody, and I wonder if anybody wants to pick it up or if you would have anything you would like to share or anything you would like to question, both to you and but also the artists who are here. Yeah, you have
I have a thing. It's not later. See what happens. bodies, the idea of bodies in the text, but also like it kind of makes me think about how we associate bodies with the dead. Like if a person goes missing, you call and say bodies been found, you know, right? It's a dead person, and I think that definitely was what the bodies, privatized bodies, etc., made me think of, and also maybe Arabella, when you're talking about bodies being manipulated, they become bodies to be manipulated. So there's something dead about that as well, and also potentially certain dance forms make us less human, more of a body as well, I think. And so there's something there. Then the idea of ghosts potentially reanimating the body or rehumaning the body. Something about that there that came out of playfulness. And when you mentioned Jay Bernard's work, some of you might know this and might not. Jay Bernard wrote a seminal piece of writing about the New Cross fire, and the ghosts were reanimated in that and rehumaned actually from what was a very dehumanizing act.
What's it called?
It's phenomenal. But I also think that that's also what the Seke, your work with the dancers with it kind of rehumans bodies that have been, or bodies that have been, this is not the right word, but that have been made not living through colonialism. And I think that's also, you know, from kind of admiring, exploring your practice a bit, like the playfulness with improvisation and not fixing bodies, but allowing people to have relationships with people in them as well, I think challenges that kind of body or dehumaning the body. So I don't know.
One thing that I thought an image that maybe crosses over quite neatly between ghosts and horror is zombies. And the word zombie is a word from Haiti and specifically denotes enslaved people who were dehumanized and who were stripped of their humanity and their souls and were reduced just to mechanical cogs in a massive industrial capitalist agrarian machine. And that the scene where these kind of mechanized movements were taking place kind of reminded me of that dehumanization that could be in the case of of enslaved people, but also could be factory workers potentially. That anyone whose humanity is taken away from them because they're just at the service of this structure that is far greater than them and from which they're not profiting themselves. That those mechanized movements reminded me of that. And if that scene was then followed straight away by those kind of gargoyle faces, then there might be a kind of, I don't know, that's made me think of zombies. I don't know if zombies ever came into the conversations that we had.
There's an interesting book called Demonic Grounds by Catherine Kittredge, which talks about humans, but it's called Demonic Grounds, Black Women and the Cultural Struggle. And it kind of looks at the psychogeographical, the colonial psychogeographical implications on Black women, but also looks at the notion of demon as a kind of spirit that can challenge the kind of the dominant narrative, and through its unknownness, through its kind of quicksilverness, through its existing outside of something, can move towards I don't know something necessarily positive, but start forging a new narrative around the edges as well. So there's something about in that not living on dead, I don't know.
I don't want to dominate the conversation, but there's just one more thing I really want to say, because there's a really wonderful kind of discussion between Seke and I think it's Alexandrina Helmsley that was published in Contemporary Theatre Review last year, and where they both talk they don't mention demons, but they talk about how the body becomes an archive for survival, and how, despite all sorts of oppression, the body of the performer can store generations and generations of culture that can be passed down and can be expressed in performance. So that's a kind of very positive sort of haunting from the past, because the body becomes an archive of all of these stories, whether they're physical stories or actual stories, that despite all the stripping away of, and dominance of, you've mentioned ballet, all the dominance of perceived superior European culture, they still survive in performers' bodies.
Yeah, I was curious about that. I guess I was just curious, in my mind, I think a lot about how embodied trauma carries on to generations. So I was thinking more the opposite of these histories that are sort of carried through generations. And I think on the back of that, because I haven't researched how this piece got there, I just really wanted to hear Seke say a little bit about the kind of more somatic investigations that perhaps led to the work. I don't know if that's possible to ask a bit about how you got there.
Yeah, I think well, one way to answer that, I feel like I tend to start when I make things, I kind of start in the same way all the time, just do the same old exercises that I always do, and I sort of try and figure out how does this relate to what I'm trying to make, if I'm even trying to make anything, which I wasn't. I mean, it could also be, well, what does this suggest? But in this case, I had a theme or parameter. So it was kind of like Jane was saying, coming to the classes, it's sort of doing stuff that I would do, if you said, can you teach a workshop? It's the kind of things that I would do. And that kind of, and a lot of that is to do with sort of this, I guess kind of agency of the person moving, but then also kind of often using memory or imagination to kind of trick yourself that it's not you who's sort of making things happen. And that really places the ideas that come up today. And that's definitely what I found, I guess, at the beginning stages of the show. So I mean, I wanted, it was interesting, like looking at all the films, because I definitely wanted to do something that really kind of leaned heavily on movement to do the work. I mean, there is text in films, that's a lot of weight, but most of the show doesn't have any text. So I wanted the movement sort of heavy lifting. I guess this sense of movement being kind of, or dancing and particularly improvising, being one kind of haunting device of sort of something being there and not there at the same time. I guess, in a sense, all those films are somewhere, whereas It Begins in Darkness isn't anywhere. Or maybe it's, I don't know, or like if it was a play, you could say, or a piece of orchestral music, or you could be like, oh, there's a score, whereas with It Begins in Darkness, it's, and any dance piece, I guess, it is in the theatre right now, but obviously it isn't. You wanted to say something?
Yes, it's going back to an earlier conversation a little bit, so apologies for that. That it was around, this thinking around bodies and faces, but also the kind of the spaces for hope and resistance that I know we're beginning to talk about, and the control of bodies and what faces can do when bodies are controlled. So I'm a secondary school teacher,
And we know that secondary school classrooms are spaces, and corridors and assembly halls are spaces where bodies are subjected to discipline. And I teach in a school that's kind of on the border of Tottenham and Hackney, and we know that these towns are especially places where the bodies of Black children and young people are especially disciplined. And I haven't seen the piece that, Arabella, when you were talking about the scene that haunted you with the faces, it just made me, and I'm not sure whether that scene for the performers and differently for audiences conveyed resistance or pain or maybe both. But all I know is that there's nothing more powerful than a teenager's side eye when you're talking, even if the body is still. And it also made me think of that iconic scene and performance in Get Out, where the protagonist's body is literally paralyzed, that everything is in the face. So the kind of the power of the face to resist and break through the ownership and enslavement or disciplining of bodies. And like I say, I haven't seen the piece, so I'm not sure how that is conveyed or how it might feel for the performers. But I'm interested in that idea of you can't kill a face even if you can control a body and the power of that. And I invite you to hang out in a secondary school club to see it.
As well, because it really struck me. And I think it's something that the site of this space, this theatre, which I visited hundreds and hundreds of times, and I don't often see faces on the faces, choreography or choreography of the face, or becoming different in the face. I wanted to ask, what was your task that you tasked them with to get the material? Because I thought it was actually such a relief, so powerful to see those faces in that space, on those dots and bodies with those techniques. It was like, for me, it's a bit like that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, so I wrote this text in lockdown, which became the score for the show. And it's a kind of mix between, it's very poetic, but it's a mix between a description of a dance piece and a description of a sort of stately home, I think Clare was mentioning. And it kind of links it into those colonial histories. And one of the images of that text is about gargoyles. So the task was basically to try and be gargoyles. It's interesting because I don't remember exactly, but I do remember when we started doing it, it just really didn't work. It just sort of felt like there was something about what we were doing that just felt sort of like it had nothing to do with anything else that we were doing in the show, and it felt very sort of and I can't remember exactly how we shifted it to make it work, but it's definitely something where I was I'm not sure about this material. So it's interesting that it's something that's like yeah. And yeah, I mean the point is not to convey gargoyles, but that's the kind of task for the performance.
Can I ask them, how did it sort of come back, or how did it start to make sense, or
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly. I think it was something around them sort of deciding to change places and be a different gargoyle in a different part of the room. I think we were doing something usually that was much more about transforming the police. I can't remember that. That they could drop it, go somewhere else and be a new gargoyle.
I wasn't there at the start of the process during this year, but I think what was clear for me is I'm not trying to scare, I'm not trying to, the intention isn't to be real and be horrific. It feels more like an impersonation, and I think that's where the humour can slip in, but also the horror can also slip in and exist. Because I'm not trying to be scary. I think it'd be quite clear if I was trying to be scary, and that either might be gimmicky or flat. I think from rehearsals, I'm like, yeah, this doesn't feel gimmicky because I'm not trying to be scared. I'm not trying to be a gargoyle, but in the spirit of a ghost, I'm trying to possess a gargoyle. Either queer it or play with it or be intentional with it, but the intention is not outwardly like kind of thing. That's how I've internalized that. But it makes me think back to the line, ghosts are impossible to pin down. And this whole process has been impossible to pin down. And I think it speaks so much to the approach and the structure of the work, in being ghosts and haunting and being haunted and being impossible to pin down. And if to even stretch it further, kind of this tension within Black histories of being pinned down, of Black dance being pinned down, and having kind of this tension of wanting to be homogenized but rejecting and resisting homogenization as Black creators, etc. So I think that was also quite clear in the dropping, the shifting of the scenes and sections. Also feels like a resistance to that, if not intentionally or obviously, inherently, because to exist in this industry as a maker, you would have never come across that as something to contend with. So I really did appreciate that, and I think it resonated with me in terms of like the idea of ghosts on and it being this kind of almost ethereal thing, and linking back to what you were talking about in terms of bodies. Someone in the audience yesterday asked a question about characterization, or what are the characters doing when they exit the stage. I'm like, I've never once thought of it as being a character, or thought about I'm doing something extra, or I'm doing this. It's, as you said, ghosts are tricksters. They exist in different ways. They materialize in different ways. From my own lens, kind of being really interested in indigenous spiritual practices, kind of really looking at it as a spirit and ghost existing in the same plane rather than impersonating or embodying a body something, because then that gives you access to the different states, a different time, whether it being stately home or just house, and suddenly we're at the edge of the universe. It really aligns with that idea of being impossible to pin down, both in a physical form and in a time form. And I think that freedom allows this to be what it is. Yeah.
I love the idea. But there's one thing I want to say is that obviously you're all incredible dancers, but you're all also actors. I think that's what gives it such a richness. You're all brilliant performers. But it's interesting what you were talking about with the faces, that you're not kind of actually trying to be scary, because I think irony there's so much irony all over the show, and that lends itself to humour. But also with irony, you can't pin things down, you never totally know where the meaning is. And I'm not saying that irony is a form of resistance automatically, but you were talking about resistance, and you were talking about Black performance and resistance. And I mentioned Stephanie Smallwood's book, Saltwater Slavery. She talks about this, she has this really wonderful image, and there's someone called Greg Moten who works in Black Studies and Performance in the USA. And they both talk about the fact that resistance started the second that people were abducted. It didn't kind of start, with the Haitian Revolution in the early 1800s. Resistance started immediately as soon as people were captured, as soon as they were trafficked on boats. And also, coming back to irony, there's kind of interesting research into very early Black performance, because Black people were forced to entertain the slavers on the boats. They were forced to dance, to keep fit, and then when they arrived in the plantations, they were forced to entertain the their masters and their masters' families. And there's lots of interesting research about how much irony is used in that, how these African performers were performing for families, but they were also just taking the piss out of them. And I don't know if you know something called the cakewalk, which for years people thought was enslaved people who were kind of showing themselves to be really clumsy by dressing up and trying to walk like the slave masters. But you can see really interesting videos on YouTube of this cakewalk, and they were mocking. There was irony also that they were mocking the people who owned them, so or who dominated them. So I think all of those ideas of kind of resistance and irony is so interesting you picked it out on, because there's a really long history going back like 400 years.
I sort of thought that might be interesting for you, Isaac, and Seke to respond to, and also something that fits into your question. The first thought was, I was really struck by what you said, Seke, about humour being sort of a form of anger, and in terms of it being sort of defiance. And I think watching a show as a Black audience member, and usually when I watch with Black audience member that is with Black performers, I'm always curious, and it's usually sits within white majority audience. I'm always curious about those pockets of humour and whether those audience members are laughing with, at, or with like uncomfortableness. So it really felt, when you said that, I felt like a piece in the sense of, because the performance existed in that world, in that haunted house, it felt like an inside, you were laughing, but it felt like an inside joke too. Like we weren't sure what you were laughing at. So it felt like it really just felt like it had defiance. And then my second question was sort of about the role of dramaturgy in this piece, like what the relationship between dramaturgy and choreography, like how does that work in sort of the process? I don't know. Yeah, if it was something, if there was any words you had to respond to about that.
Yeah, I really like the idea of like inside joke, the power of an inside joke to connect people. Yeah, dramaturgy. I think really the main role of dramaturgy, the practice of dramaturgy in this, is just to be someone to talk to really about the work, who is also watching it from the outside, but who is not actively making it. So there were some things that we did together, like we looked at a lot of the writing together. In the early days, we were like, I remember being at Wainsgate dances and just having like books everywhere, and like the space was a lot more fluid, and like we were both moving and reading out loud and whilst moving, and then writing together and cutting things up and sticking together. And it was much more just like cooking, like cooking together. And then once I guess the funding was in place and then the dancers were on board, I became much more of an outside eye role. And then it was just being another person to be in conversation. And other than that, no special say in, no special say in. It's a say.
I think also the humour is, I like the idea of it being an inside joke. I mean, it almost feels to me like I don't even know if it's fun or not, or like we did develop some material last year that felt like genuinely like this is genuinely really fun, and like we have no sense of humour, not fun. Whereas I think most of, if not all of the humour in the show it's the kind of thing you might laugh at, depending on who else is in the audience and what mood you're in. I mean, we did a show in Cardiff and there was very little laughter in the weekend. I mean, there were some people who found it really funny, but I think they didn't feel enabled to laugh out loud because it was such a quiet. And I've also had some people being quite annoyed that people were laughing. And then other people, that's kind of the main thing that they sort of take from the show. It's really fun. So I mean, that's all good for me. I feel like the ambiguity of it is interesting. And yeah, I think it is. It's sort of. It definitely feels linked to anger for me in that there's not really in the theatre. I don't feel like there's a point. There's not somewhere to point the anger to. You know, it's not like we come shout at the audience because it's like, well, what would that do? Or shout at each other in an argument like that would sort of not quite. That would feel very manipulative or sort of hijacking something, using it as a sort of power trip. But I feel like the humour still gets at the anger, but without it sort of harming anyone, without some collateral damage. It's presenting something angry, disturbing, without any results that make you feel like disturbing.
Sorry, so
Maybe
quick.
just
This is really tangential. It's just something I was thinking about, and I think I was also thinking about it when you were talking about the kind of realness and not acting as well. And there's choices about voices. And I just thought because there seemed to be a little bit of a verb on the voice, and not only mine. And I just wondered I'm just curious about the decision, not in a bad way, good way, but just because then it's slightly less natural and more mediatized. And I just wondered what.
Yeah, I mean the whole journey with the sound was very long and complex. So in some ways I'm like, oh gosh, I'm not sure how we ended up with where we got to with the sound. I feel like I had quite sort of tussle with the idea of like recorded sound. Just feels like such a great sort of example of haunting, almost too good to sort of be like, well, why would I want? It's been done so well. Why should I add something else to this? And I think that was kind of that's kind of where I got to with that. But I think there's traces of that in it, including we've got these mics on the floor that slightly amplify the whole show. And then the minimal moments of music, although the composer, Aisha, she says it isn't music, technically, because it has no pitch. But she created that we recorded a lot of the material, the movie material, and sent it to her, and she tried to emulate what she heard the dancers doing on violin and double bass. So that's kind of how that happened. But I think, I guess I sort of feel like I wanted to refer to that kind of ontological thing with recorded sound, but I felt like I don't really want to go all the way into that because I guess I felt like it would take away from the movement, the sense of it being about what we said, body dancing.
We worked quite a lot on how to say them. Priority, I think, was always clarity. Partly, that it was just a no-brainer that we wanted all of the text to come across and be kind of undoubtable. apart from, of course, the whispering, the accompanying, where that's very different. There were other moments where we worked on in the haunted house, kind of encountering things and describing them on sort of affirming or like announcing what things are rather than it feeling like a question or something. So I think there's quite a lot of nuance in how the text delivered. But also we were never really going for any kind of naturalism, I don't think, or any kind of, I think it's very subconsciously a performance, as well as just sort of creation of an encounter.
I think also how worked a little bit was that the sort of the brief moments of sound, like recorded sound and slightly amplified sound of the voices. It's sort of, for me, it kind of turns the volume up on very quiet moments because they feel in relation to that. I think, a lot of the process was about figuring out the sort of energy of the different sections and how to shift between them.
Thank you very much. It was very, very rich, I would say. And I'm conscious of time, and but I wonder if Seke, you want to come in. Good luck both. And I wonder if you want to say anything about what's coming up.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me, and thanks for presenting, and thanks for coming. It feels like it's a ridiculous honour to sort of have your work talk. It was like already like such a thing to actually make something. It's so hard to like get into the ground and discuss it with like such huge intentions. Like, probably will never happen again. So. Thanks for that. It's super interesting. Interesting to like go into these things, which in a way we sort of were looking at kind of a few years ago started the project. So interesting, and also we've had discussions as well. So. That's been great.
I wonder if there is any plan for the show to go abroad, because I'm curious of non-British.
Same. Plans no. Hopes yes. I'd be very curious. But so many different places. See how it resonates.
So thank you very much again. Claire, it's been very, very an honor for us to have you.
Oh, it's been an honor.
Just to say that this event is sponsored by Society for Dance Research, catering the co-chair is here. And we are also here to invite you, if you are not yet, to become members. And with the membership, you get the journal, Dance Research, and access to these events. Doubting. And
it's a nice time for your dance research
Which is to say, a huge thanks to Arabella for bringing it out. Thank you.